good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching us this day. I'm really pleased to be here to share with these women and their stories. My name is Tonni Brodber. I am the head of the Secretariat for the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, or WPHF. And today we're sitting with three incredible women human rights defenders who have been supported by WPHF's Women Human Rights Defenders Window. Now, what does it really mean to be a woman human rights defender? That's a lot, it's heavy, and I'm curious to hear from each one of these women what it means for them and the kind of work that they've been doing. So with us today we have Tabitha Netuwa, we have Sandra Alloush, and we have Revollo. And I'm going to let them tell you who they are, and then we're going to have a conversation about what they do and why they were called to the work that they do. So Tabitha, why don't we start with you? Can you tell our colleagues who you are?
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here today. My name is Tabitha Netuwa, and I work with Defend Defenders, which is a human rights defending organization working out of Kampala. We are a network of human rights defenders and organizations working to protect and promote human rights. We do this through emergency response for at-risk human rights defenders, enhancing their capacities to work safely, building their resilience through advocacy, and providing platforms for human rights defenders to speak about their stories, to speak truth to power. As a woman human rights defender, I'm particularly keen on advocating and speaking about the rights that women have, especially in Africa, where societies are extremely patriarchal in nature.
Are you a mother, a daughter, a sister, a brother?
I am all of the above. I'm a mother to three lovely children. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. I'm part of a bigger family, and I'm glad to do what I do every day.
Thank you so much, Tabitha. Sandra.
Hi, Tonni, and fellow human rights defenders, and to all who is watching us. I can't remember a time when I wasn't a human rights defender because it comes with the personality, I think. There are certain people who feel the responsibility to speak out every time they see injustice, and just by doing so, you are defending human rights. It doesn't require a college or university degree to be a human rights defender. We can all do it from each of our positions. And my position in life is that I'm a journalist and I'm a documentary filmmaker. So I do use those skills and tools to create narratives that are just and that are based on realities, breaking stereotypes about migrant and asylum seekers, especially women, and their journeys and their lives in the hosted countries, and to see the systemic flaws that exist that help put them back or oppressing them in many ways and take their agencies in some places. So yeah, I do that through my documentaries, my news reporting, and I volunteer with the civil society organizations, especially led by migrant and refugees, to advocate for our rights.
Thank you, Sandra. Pia, and we were laughing because Pia is my neighbor, or was my neighbor. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, and Pia is Venezuelan.
Yeah.
So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Tonni, for bringing us in here. So who am I? I'm a human, and I dedicate to defend the rights and the well-being of the life, however is a human and nature. I merge all my passion and my capacities, and when I was a child, I was thinking to be archaeologist because I like to discover things. So at the end of the day, I'm doing it, but in a different way. So I'm doing research, collect information, and bring out wherever it needs to speak up. So I defend the human rights. I defend the right of nature, and I do it with my heart because it's something that makes my life meaningful. And for me, it's like a planting seeds that some of them we can see it like a blooming before we leave the war, but from other side, in the future, the generation will perceive what we are doing now. So that's why I'm glad to be here and supported by the window.
So, for each of you, humans, who happen to put human rights at the forefront of the way in which you live, some of you are what persons would refer to as refugees. Sandra, I want to ask you, what do you see yourself as a refugee and why?
Yes, I am a refugee. And because with the word refugee, it comes an implication of the reasons of why I am here. So it wasn't a choice. I didn't choose to migrate. I was forced to flee my country due to political reasons and the reasons of war and unsafety for journalists and human rights defenders to live in Syria when I left in 2012. So yeah, it is, I am a refugee, I'm an exiled person. And this emotional trauma stays with me until today, and it is so difficult to accept the fact that it's been more than 13, 14 years now that I'm in exile, away from my country, from my family, from my life and everything that I built for myself over there. And it is not my choice. And until now, returning to my country is not a choice.
Pia, do you see yourself as a refugee?
Actually, I have a, I'm not gonna say problem, but I don't know what does it mean in fact. The only thing I know is that brought me here is the unsafety to live in my home country. Being expelled, it's not about being a refugee, expelled about the system. So it's a systematic things that have to be addressed. So I don't know what does it mean in fact or embody being a refugee. I'm just a person that was forced to live without any choices. It was to stay or maybe die, or to live and survive and bring this experience, a life experience among people like us and you. So I found a problem or issue the fact of perceiving from outside the refugee side, nobody expecting us. Nobody expect like the wave of people, but nobody expect also to leave the country with a bag with a few clothes and their dreams on the bag and leave. So this is it's something that I appreciate the question, because it's something that makes me reflect about the identity and who we are. But this situation did not define me as a person, just define the currently situation that prevent me to stay in the home or in the land I born and I will have to pass away. Yeah.
Something that is very clear is that there's not a homogenous group of refugees that look the same way and act the same way. You're expelled. Some choose to leave before they're expelled. There are economic reasons why people leave. There are political reasons why people leave. And Pia, you were saying, and you said it so softly and almost so normally, it's a life or death issue for many people. You said, I could choose to go or stay and die. Now, Tabitha, the women that you work with who are refugees, what are some of the trends and challenges amongst that population that you see? And for those of you who may not know, Kampala is in Uganda.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I work a lot with women human rights defenders forced to leave their countries. And during the time they leave, many on foot, through territory they don't know, barely any form of means of transport, going through so much trauma, they face a lot of sexual violence before they leave, but also during the journey. they face a lot of, they are threatened, their properties taken, their families are divided because sometimes they don't all fit in one car that they are fortunate enough to find to take them halfway through the journey. They fall ill. Some of them die, natural causes. It's a very treacherous journey many times. And when they get to their final destination, it's a struggle to fit in. New society, new language, new culture, new ways of doing things, new food, new money. You don't even understand the currency of the country that you're forced to move to oftentimes. And then they are forced to build their lives, trying to find school for the children, trying to find a house to live in, trying to navigate what the new place has, and most of all, trying to find their identity. Oftentimes, we hear numbers. Oh, there are 100,000 refugees in this country. There are 200,000. But all of those are human beings with names, with identities, with a sense of belonging. They're not just a number. It is somebody. So trying to navigate all that for women human rights defenders and try to live a somewhat normal life takes time. Takes a lot of resilience, and I have a lot of respect for women human rights defenders who eventually make a life. I have a lot of respect for you both because it's difficult. It's just so difficult. As a woman human rights defender, one of my worst fears is being forced to leave my country and having to start a life somewhere else.
I don't think many people understand what it means, and many people don't really understand what life really is like or was like in Syria or Venezuela or Uganda, that people go shopping, they have lunch, brunch with their friends and their family. There are a lot of stereotypes about people who live in these countries. When the country finds itself in a crisis, that in advocacy you can shift in terms of it could be you. Now, WPHF is a fund that supports women human rights defenders. We have 3 main windows, and I know that some of you heard more about the ways in which you could benefit from WPHF. One is our regular funding cycle, where we've been able to support over 1,343 organizations. Another is a rapid response window, making sure that when people need support rapidly, they can receive it through their organizations, and we partner with international NGOs, like an organization like yours, to do so. And then the third one is the Women Human Rights Defender window, where over 600 women have been able to benefit from this window and their families. Can you tell me why this kind of support is useful to you? Often, I have to tell you, we work at the UN and sometimes we get to meet you when we're lucky. Often we get to go to the countries. But there's a moment where you question your life choices and you think, am I really doing what is needed for those who most need it? Has the WPHF Women Human Rights Defender window been what you needed at the times that you need it? And you all have always been honest with us, so if there's more we need to do, let us know. But please, Pia, why don't you start, and then we hear from each of you.
So I believe if I told you, sometimes we don't know how can I say it? We don't know what we do in fact, and how long is the impact of our actions. So I'm just like get in touch to the window, so I'm really new, and I feel that the people I linked in my country feels supported. Only because of your action for bring me here, or try to engage in our job, so it brings hope, because many people have been left behind and the voices still are not listen all the message. So it's a matter of building bridges and you make it stronger by your support, even with big or small action. And it's not only matter of the money. It's about to being here, to being there for us.
Sandra.
So I'm going to speak from the point of view of a journalist because
You are a journalist.
yes, of course, and the challenges we have, it's like it has another layer. For example, most human rights defenders who are journalists, they don't have press cards because we are mostly independent. We don't work for a mainstream outlet, so we don't have salaries. And with that as well comes the burden of not having a press card, which means we are not protected from persecution. Our resources are not protected when we are doing investigative work. And our access to events and political spaces are very limited, if not non-existent at all. And this put the woman journalist who's defending human rights in her work as a journalist in grave danger, facing, for example, as a refugee as well. I could tell you many people are afraid of deportation, of losing their residency permits. It's not just a fear, because there are people who are losing the residency permits and being under threat of deportation from EU states, especially some EU states. And there are other countries, even in the European countries and abroad, who are legalizing the persecution and criminalization of press, of journalism. And human rights defenders who are journalists now are facing charges under terror acts in some countries. This is beyond what we can take as human rights defenders, especially who are very vulnerable. We are not citizens of those countries, and our whole existence could be threatened by those intimidations and criminalizations that the states are doing. Because if I would be deported tomorrow to Syria, I will be imprisoned by the Syrian state right from the moment I arrive in Syria. And this, until now, did not stop me from doing my job. But if things come to where the state would tell me, okay, you're going to be deported or you're going to shut up, then I'm going to have to shut up, because the other choice is going to death. And this is what most of us now, refugee and migrant women who defend human rights, are facing. Especially that we have a very toxic, polarized political environment around the world that is ready to accuse and make violence against women human rights defenders, cyberbullying and intimidations, and even in person. So I would suggest that maybe WPHF could think of having a press card issued to journalist human rights defenders who don't qualify per se to get the press cards from the states where they reside in, because of many criteria that we can't have. This press card will allow us to enter events, political spaces, and be part of covering and protecting our resources and protecting us from persecution as well. This could be a very beneficial move that help protect human rights defenders who are journalists, and by doing so we are protecting freedom of speech and the freedom of those journalists to do their jobs, and then advocating for all people's rights.
Thank you for that, Tabitha.
Thank you, Tonni. The very nature of human rights work leads to some level of risk. Mm-hmm. Many women human rights defenders, by speaking out, talking about their lived realities, face backlash from state and non-state actors. Defenders works closely with the WPHF to provide much needed support to women human rights defenders in the areas of capacity enhancement. How can women human rights defenders work safely in restricted contexts, in context of conflict, in context of where civic space barely exists? And women human rights defenders are navigating those very restricted spaces to speak about the violations ongoing, documenting violations, Engaging in advocacy activities, platforms, the funding mechanisms provided has made it possible for women human rights defenders to come to the UN Human Rights Council and speak about the violations in their countries from different parts of the world. Has enabled women human rights defenders to engage with the mechanisms. In Africa, we have the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, where women human rights defenders go and engaging in the universal periodic review process, the peer review mechanisms at regional level. Women human rights defenders have been able to travel from different parts of the continent and engage, and then bringing to the world the lived realities of what it means to work in conflict areas. A lot of times, the vital voices of women human rights defenders have been heard, have been listened to because of funding under the mechanism. And when the risk happens, the financial support to relocate from point A to point B, right. The financial support to get much needed medical care because of injuries sustained in a conflict setting. Being able to reunite with families. I remember there was a woman human rights defender who was forced to leave. She'd fled from her country. And then months later, she was reunited with her children. The joy, the happiness, the fulfillment. They are all in exile right now, but at least she gets to see her children every morning. This is what the mechanism does. It supports women human rights defenders who need it most. A lot more could still be done. Mm-hmm. I know that there are financial constraints. There's so much conflict going on in different parts of the world. But then the difference the support makes, the smiles, having access to psychosocial support, well-being support. It's not easy being a woman human rights defender. It's not easy working in a patriarchal society. It's not easy holding governments to account for violations. It impacts one's mental health and that much needed support to speak to a psychologist, to even go somewhere and just sleep. Some women human rights defenders never get to sleep for a whole night. You know, medically they say 8 hours of sleep is what's recommended. That's a luxury for many in conflict settings. Having to go to a place where you're not hearing gunshots, you're not worried about that knock on the door, somebody coming to snatch you out of your house and take you into a place of detention, makes such a huge difference for women human rights defenders. I think this mechanism has provided the much needed relief. And many women human rights defenders are alive today because of this mechanism.
Thank you for that. That makes us need to do what we're doing more. And all of you have pointed to areas in which we can do more, but we can't do more without support. A lot of what you're talking about takes me back to why the UN exists in the first place and why we're even speaking about human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was not a Western creation. It was a creation of the United Nations. And many countries have said that this is the lodestar, this is what they're aspiring to, because we recognize that human rights are each individual's promise throughout their life. Sandra, you were saying you're surprised it's been 10 years. Since you've been able to return to your family. I think your story in particular, you were saying the LA Times spoke of your story, but the fact that each one of you has been using your skill set that you used in your country before you were exiled, or in the case of those of us who can still stay in our countries, that we're still trying to use our skill sets to better push forward a better future for ourselves, our families, and everyone around us if you choose the human rights defender path. For you, what was you didn't expect to be here?
No.
What brought you to this moment where you are now, beyond being a human rights defender in your country for women in your country, you're now being a human rights defender for refugees across Europe? Tell us a little bit more about your story.
Well, I was the main TV presenter for Syrian News TV back when the revolution started in 2011. And I stayed at my post because I was in my opinion, delivering or amplifying the voices of the people who took to the street to protest to the general public in Syria. But by doing so, I was actually going against the state in the narrative that they wanted to deliver to the people and to spread, which put me in direct conflict daily with the channel's directors, and I was under the threat of detention all of this time, to an end where I decided that it's time that I quit and I leave the country, because I can't be anymore part of the propaganda machine. Even if in my conscience I am doing what is right, but still I was part of that propaganda machine, and I couldn't accept that for myself, especially after the atrocities that I have witnessed being committed by the state against civil society defenders and human rights activists and just normal people who are saying and asking for freedom. So I left my country and I became a person in exile in Lebanon for 3 years, where due to a lot of restrictions in the laws, I was without residency permit for 6 months. So I was like almost in prison inside my apartment, not able to leave the apartment because I was afraid of being deported to Syria if any roadblock would find out that I'm here on an invalid permit. I contacted the French authorities through some civil society organizations, and they helped me to obtain a visa for a persecuted journalist. In 2015, I arrived in France. After 2 months, I started working with Arte to document my life as a refugee in France, and through that journey, I got to also go to different cities in France and then around Europe and discover how other people are treated. Asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees. And it became evident for me that I can't work on issues that are not directly related to defending people's rights. It is my calling in life, and I feel that I have the responsibility to amplify the voices of people who are living now in Europe some in horrible conditions, some in better conditions, and some who are like me, who are human rights defenders as well.
Pia, your route is an environmental route. We're talking about turtles. One of my favorite animals. They carry their homes with them wherever they go. How does working on turtles lead you to where you are now? And how do you continue to take the skills that you applied when you were doing that environmental work to where you are now?
Well, I'll try to be short, but something I would like to address before I continue and answer. What Sandra said, it's also part of my own story, because I'm a peaceful person. My roots, it's also a musician. I started to play music when I was a child, at 5 years old. So the sensitivity that we have developed in a different ways make us a peaceful person that's seeking for peace. But about the narrative, being or talk about human rights, bring us to the position to speak up against a government. So this is the things that we are dealing with. To speak on human rights is not about to be against of anybody. So this is something that it's really like it's a focal point of my life, because define the way I have to leave my country. So I start with turtles. I move on to a beautiful island in my country, and it's also we share the Caribbean Ocean, and I discover like how is to protect the nature, and I learned so much about the nature, and I try to reflect in the way how the human beings also are developed. So I start to help or try to help communities building project by multiple multiple impact. So for community, tourism, languages, I studied more languages. So it was not my will to be or continue the human rights. So I started also to face the fears of my friends. They were speaking up. Then I have to be hidden. I was hidden in order to continue. And in some points, all of them merged together. Because I was speaking up for the right of the people of my country. I was trying to do something for the right of nature in order to preserve the life. And in one point, I was in the content from universities, and I present my project, and they say, your project is so beautiful, and it's really like a powerful, but in this kind of system, it's not going to work. So after that, I found myself working in the Congress of my country, because I said, okay, if it's a politics, then I will try to help in another way. And I accept that challenge, and I was really like I feel proud to go also to that way and try to do something for my country, for the people, and to prevent the same thing that happened to the younger generation, and they could develop their life, their dreams in that way. So at that point, still I'm defending the nature. I work on nature and peace. I work with indigenous communities, and I'm here trying to do the things that have to be done.
Tabitha, she's here doing the things that have to be done. Sandra has continued to use her voice, driven by her conscience, to share people's realities. For you, what are the support you're doing through your organization, what more do you think the world needs to know about the women human rights defenders that you are supporting? What do we need to know so that we can really create peace? And this is a question that I'm going to ask each and every one of you. We're all doing a lot of work. We're all, whether it's through music, whether through its art, the media, we're trying to create a better world for ourselves, our children, and those around us, which I think everyone agrees has peace at the center of it. But how do you do that? And what more do people need to know about the people that you're supporting and how they are trying to do that for themselves and those around them?
Thank you, Tonni. Over 75 years ago, this year it's 76 years ago, the UDHR, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, was adopted. 26 years ago, the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders was adopted in 1998. At that time, this was meant as a sign of commitment by states to uphold fundamental rights and freedoms of individuals. And the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders was aimed at ensuring that there's protection and support for human rights defenders at the front line of ensuring that the UDHR is upheld and respected. Many years later, the status quo hasn't changed much. There are barely countries in our region that, I think it's only 3 or 4 countries that have a law protecting human rights defenders. Conflict is rife at a global level. Human rights defenders are speaking out. Women human rights defenders are speaking up about the impact of not respecting the UDHRs. I think we need to listen more to women human rights defenders. We need to provide platforms for them to speak out. Through the WPHF, this has been made possible, but a lot more can be done. A lot more should be done. States should adhere to their commitments to provide resources, financial and technical, build the capacities of women human rights defenders to be able to continue doing what they do best. At Defend Defenders, our organization was founded by a human rights defender forced into exile. At the time, there were barely any mechanisms providing for support of human rights defenders. Our executive director is called Mr. Hassan Shire. And his dream was a world where the rights of human rights defenders are upheld and respected. But that's far from the reality right now. And I think, we need to reflect on what we haven't done as institutions, as governments, as human rights defenders, and what more can be done. But ultimately, we need to respect the commitments that we have signed on to at a global level.
Sandra.
Tonni, I couldn't agree more of what Tabitha said. It is vital that we have more protections and that WPHF has more support from states and INGOs and everybody who is really have an interest of protecting the sanctity of life and nature, and all types of advocacy that we do needs more support. We need financial support, protection mechanisms. We need stability. And before that, you were also talking about mental health, which is a huge issue also for human rights defenders. But personally, also as a journalist, I would ask to have special projects across the civil society organizations and states to support media projects that are made by human rights defenders, documentaries, podcasts, campaigns, media campaigns, because if we don't change the discourse and the narrative around human rights defenders, from women, migrant, refugees, all of this is going to undermine our work and to limit our reach and our access and our impact. And believe me, if we have managed to do what we have done with the small limited resources that we have or we had, believe me, we can do much greater things if we had adequate support. And by this, I mean, please invest more in human rights and journalism and in the intersection between these two, because otherwise there will always be a big gap that is not covered. Why it is important to support human rights defenders. This comes through media campaigns. This comes through podcasts showcasing the lives and successes and challenges of human rights defenders, especially women.
Thank you for that, Sandra. Pia?
Well, being human rights defender, it's I think it should be watching us as allies. We are like working together for the base, which is the chapter of human rights. So we all of us work on that way. So from the perspective of my work, the people that I'm working with and for is trying to raise consciousness. And this is also, from my perspective, important key for peace. We need to be more conscious about the way how it relate to each other, how the difference between humans can be also plays a role to go forward in order to develop what we need to do. So we all need peace. We all want peace, and the conflict is for me is the way how we try to looking for the peace. So it's sometimes it's encounter different perspective, and this could lead to some small conflict. But we need to try to solve it, and that's what the indigenous communities do, and that is really meaningful knowledge. I can I'm honored to perceive and to experience, because they are very diverse. And they also know how to relate with the nature, and they are bringing up many solutions related to communication, peacemaking, and environmental justice. So they are trying to raise the conscious about their life, and yeah, we are here to try to to bring those voices outside.
And witness one another as we do it.
Yeah.
You know, I saw a meme on, I think it was Instagram, where they were talking about the fact that those of us who share the world now, we have the unique opportunity of sharing the world with each other for about 100 years.
Yeah.
It's a unique opportunity. It is the one thing that we have in common, and we will have disagreements, but those disagreements don't need to lead to conflict.
Yes.
In terms of violence. Conflict is normal in terms of just us not agreeing, but violent conflict does not have to be. And Tabitha, you were speaking about 76 years now of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we have a celebration coming up next year. 30 years of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and 25 years since Security Council Resolution 1325. What do you hope for? I remember when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action passed. I was a teenager. I remember when 1325 passed. What do you hope for the next 25 to 30 years? Because all of what we're discussing are that interconnection with the media, that interconnection with the environment. It's reflected in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals as well. We're calling it different things, but it is that desire of human beings to live peacefully in accord with our environment and each other. What do we hope in the next 30 to 25 years? What do you hope to see as women human rights defenders?
I think we really need to take stock of what we committed to do and reflect on what we've done as human rights defenders, as organizations, as governments. Have we achieved what we committed to do? If not, why? Many women human rights defenders wake up every morning looking to do a lot of good in the world, working in contexts where it's almost impossible to even talk about any rights. And as duty bearers, states have the obligation to provide a platform, to provide space for expression, to provide space and protect human rights defenders. That is not being done, at least in our neck of the world in Africa. It's barely being done by any government fulfilling their obligations. Next year provides time for reflection and renewed commitment. Governments need to enact laws protecting human rights defenders. They need to recognize the vital role that human rights defenders play in our society. This is the call that civil society has had over the last 25 years since the declaration, and close to 30 years now since all the commitments made at the UN level. And we re-echo that, calling on governments to stick to their promises and commitments. Provide funding, provide platforms for human rights defenders to speak out, provide safe spaces, provide for their protection at national level, at regional and international level. And this is something that has to be done, and done now, before it's too late.
Thank you.
Where do I start?
At the very beginning.
At the very beginning, let's hold the dictators accountable, the war criminals accountable. And only when people around the world see justice is done, and those criminals who are, not me are calling them criminals, although I have the right, of course, because I've seen it. I was there. But those criminals are allowed to rule countries continuously until now, keeping the human rights violations, keeping women human rights defenders in jails, under sexual violence, under torture for years. Nobody knows who they are, where they are, how many they are, how many lost their lives, and I'm talking about Syria. And today also, we have to recognize the decisions of the ICC and the ICJ, and to act and uphold those decisions. Because otherwise, there's no need to have a declaration of human rights if there is no accountability. If politicians can commit crimes with impunity, I don't see how we as human rights defenders can make it stop. So this should be a decision on the UN level for a reform of how the UN is operating at the moment, especially the Security Council, and to see really accountability, and then we can move forward into evaluating how our performance was as human rights defenders, because I don't think that the problem is with the human rights defenders or with the declaration itself, but it's with how it is applied or not applied, and when it is not applied, what are the consequences on the people who are suffering from those dictators and criminals. So this could be my advocacy point at the.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to follow each and every one of you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will just try to say something really short. The change is unavoidable. So it's not the change. It's not. It cannot be avoided. So the way how we experience the reality now in this precise moment, in all the human, leading by violence, wars, wherever it could happen, aggressions. So this is not sustainable and will change in one moment to another one. So the rule of law should remain in order to make peace. The Human Rights Declaration is the main, I don't know,
Pillar.
Is the main pillar for the work around United Nations, and I believe the diplomatic should be attached more to the Human Rights Declaration than in the relation and the softness they treat each other when the human rights abuse came up to the table, because there is something called responsibility to protect. And this is over the right of every political system to treat the internal affairs. So human rights should be protected in all the globe, and everybody is responsible to speak of.
So, you know, each of you have said such powerful, impactful things and identified the ways in which we as a world can be looking towards the future in a more holistic way with human rights at the center. And as you were saying, Pia, it's not necessarily about being against governments. It's being for protection. It's being for human rights. It's about the promise of the United Nations, which means we can get to a conclusion. We could get to a conclusion centered on human rights if we invest in people. Each human rights defender has a different priority based on their skills. You've only met 3 today. We have so many more. As I said, just in 1 year, 207 women have been supported, just in 1 year. And most of them have been supported for social protection work, that psychosocial support, that when you've left everything behind except a knapsack, how do you survive? How do you reteach yourself to survive? The Caribbean is a region of many natural hazards like hurricanes, and I'll never forget a former Speaker of the House from one Caribbean country saying, everybody's talking about me being resilient. I don't want to have to be resilient. I just want my shoes back. I want my house back. I want the basics back. Yeah. And I think that may be true for many human rights defenders. It's not necessarily that you chose this path. You have to take this path because you believe in human rights. So I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing with us saying things that many people would not say on an international stage. And whether those of you who are joining us online agree with everything that was said or not, we think it is very important for us to hear each other, understand one another, so that we can come to a shared understanding of what peace really looks like for each and every one of us. So if you have one last word, and I'm driving back home into what it is for a 15-year-old in 2055, what is it that we hope for them? I mean, I think we would hope everybody's a human rights defender and a woman human rights defender because they believe and they're driven by that. But what's that one word that you want for them? For a young woman, for a young man, what do you want for them? In Venezuela, in Syria, in Uganda, across Africa and the world? I'll start with you, Tam.
I want them to find a world where the freedom of association, expression, and assembly is being upheld, respected, and everybody can speak truth to power with no restrictions.
Actually, I was thinking now of this, how simple it is to ask not to be under threat just for speaking up. This is a very simple asking, and I think human rights defenders have been asking this for ages, but we're still not there. So hopefully, maybe by then, human rights defenders and everybody are protected and empowered to sound their opinion, and we don't have to agree on everything. We can respectfully disagree and keep living in a nice, cohesive society for all of us.
Thank you, both of you.
Well, I could be against of me, but I wish the people doesn't have to be a human rights defender or peacemaker. So this is my wish for the future generation. So this somehow should stop in order to develop ourselves as a human beings instead of fighting, resistance, and struggling and being resilient. We don't want to be resilient. We don't want to fight. We don't want to survive. We want to live. And this is what I expect for everybody.
Thank you all. As I told you when I met each and every one of you, you're inspirational. When you think your life is hard, you look at other people's lives and you realize that they are doing the absolute best that they can with the circumstances that they are in. And that should motivate each of us not only to do that, but to listen. And as I was saying, 207 in 1 year and 195 of the grants of the support that we gave went to social protection. 12 went to advocacy. We need to be able to make sure more and more of you can advocate, and that's where a lot of the media comes into it, and being able to tell your own stories. So I'm inviting those of you who joined us online now, and those of you who will listen later, please make sure that you do your part. One, to listen. Sometimes with all of the noise out there, you can be distracted, but focus in and listen to the stories. Two, continue to support. Create opportunities within your spaces for women human rights defenders to share directly. Use your own space to open up spaces for others. And then if you can, financially contribute. Right now, we need more support to make sure that you get more support. And you told us how you need the support. So it's a challenge to you and a call to action to everyone who's listened. We want a world where people don't have to be threatened for speaking their minds, whether we agree with what they say or not. And we want a world in which young people don't have to be human rights defenders, because that is the norm. Peace is the norm, and the respect for human rights is the norm. Thank you so much for joining us today. And keep an eye on our social media platforms. You'll hear much more from these incredible women and many others. Thank you.